Take a few seconds as we get started here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Durell Coleman Social Impact Live. I'm excited to be talking to you today about a topic that's near and dear to me as we approach Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, talking to you a little bit more about Dr. King, his philosophy on life, and what that means for us as we approach creating social change in the world. I think that as I look through history, as I look at people who have been an example to me of what it means to live a good life, a life that's committed to doing the right thing, Dr. King has been always on that list of people. Dr. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, these are people who are often mentioned in the same breath as one another. But I've had the privilege and the pleasure of diving deeper into Dr. Martin Luther King's work and his philosophy on life. And so ultimately what I want to do on this episode of Social Impact Live is dive deeper into his philosophy and how that applies to what we are trying to do in the world today, the change that we're trying to create, the social impact that many of us seek to create in this world. Dr. King is viewed as someone whose legacy stands for unity in a lot of ways. He is someone whose legacy stands for a dream that we can one day shed many of the ideas of the past that have kept us divided from one another. And while we lift him up annually as his day approaches, the day that commemorates his birth approaches, I do think that there is more to his life and his actions and what he stood for and how he carried himself, how he created the change in the world that he created, that we can apply to what we are trying to do here and now. So for the next few days, I'm going to be diving into Dr. King's 6 principles of nonviolence, and for each one, giving a little commentary to how I think that applies to what we're going through right now. So without further ado, the first principle of nonviolence that Dr. King lived by and created such profound change in American society because of was this principle that nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. So this idea that there is something courageous within the act of not being violent toward others. I think it's a profound concept in and of itself, because what we typically think of, or what we typically hear in society, is this idea that to fight, that to be violent, that to be angry and aggressive, directly aggressive toward others, is actually the way that of the man, right? The way of the strong, right? And instead, Dr. King, he modeled this idea that to be nonviolent is actually to be courageous. To not fight back directly is to be courageous. One of the things that I think brings his life and his vision and his methods to life for me is that there were 2 big figures that he credits for inspiring him in the way that he approached his work in the civil rights movement, as well as his work throughout his life in general. One of those is Jesus Christ, the person who he was inspired by, someone who famously, right, said, turn the other cheek, right? When someone slaps you, turn the other cheek, to say ultimately that this idea of non-aggression, right? Not fighting back physically, not coming towards someone with anger and responding in that way, that there's something about not doing that is powerful and right and good. And the second person that inspired Dr. King was Gandhi, who really led the Indian independence movement, and whose actions of nonviolence were so profound to him as well. So this idea of it being courageous to not be violent, I think, has both moral implications, which I really resonate with as someone who really doesn't love violence in and of itself. I mean, I I've struggled with this. I'm by no means a perfect person, but when I think about the best way to live my life, I think it is one that truly respects life, respects all life, respects life from the moment of conception through the death, respects every single living being, every piece of a beautiful, constructive life that could possibly exist. Thinks about people that we've written off in society, that we've said that person should be executed, that person should be killed, that person is no good, that person should be thrown into X, Y, or Z situation. I look at that and I say, I think that the way that I actually want to respond to that is actually with love instead. And so that to me is what it means to value life, to care for all life, to not say it's an either or situation, it's a zero sum situation. And I think that Dr. King embodied that idea in a lot of ways. When I turn to the practical implications of nonviolence, though, right, as we seek to create social change in the world, as we seek to make the world around us a better place, and I think this is true in a number of situations, but when we're talking about social change that you know talks about entire groups of people, we start to notice that when the minority group uses violence to counter the majority group, they actually lose power. And I think that we actually see an example of that happening really recently here in America. You know, on January 6th, pro-Trump protesters, rioters broke into the Capitol of the United States of America, the Capitol building. You know, the legislators that were there had to flee from that environment. And ultimately, what this did was it created a situation where any cause that was being supported by that group has to be acted against, has to be condemned in strong words, but also in strong action. And it actually ends up undercutting any message that someone was trying to deliver. So, you know, I think the point here is to say that whether your message, and I'm not here to comment on, I'm not trying to say that everyone who could bring this position has the best position to bring in the first place. But ultimately, what I'm saying is, if you're in the minority group and you choose to respond to the majority group with violence, it is not generally going to turn out to be a positive situation for you. One of the major things that Dr. King talked about in his approach, when he talked about the goals of nonviolent resistance, is that he talked about the idea of raising the level of tension to the point where you could bring people to the negotiating table, but not raising the tension through violence and through aggressive action, but rather raising the tension through nonviolent means, through direct action, which is the method of refusing to engage with or go along with the status quo, where you have your own free will and your own ability to do so. So those are some major tenets or some major pieces that I sort of pull out of that first pillar of Dr. King's approach. This idea that nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, that it is courageous to not bring aggression into a situation, that in reality, to respond with violence as a minority group, I think generally turns you into a vulnerable population, especially when you give credence or reason or rationale potentially for someone else to use violence against you, and they have overwhelming force on their side. And so as we seek to create change, as we seek to make the world a better place through various social movements, you know, and I increasingly want to be speaking to you about the aspects of society that I want to see altered, right? As we move into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and then we move into Black History Month, I'm going to be bringing you more messages around these principles, these underlying principles. We have history, right? We have people in the past who've done great things, and we can turn to those examples to understand how we can better navigate the here and now. When people talk about riots, when we talk about burning down buildings, when we talk about the riot being the language of the oppressed, I think there's so much truth to that. The riot is the language of the oppressed at times, or at least those who believe themselves to be. as I think about the more recent attacks on the Capitol. But either way, the point of this statement is that I think can muddy the waters when it comes to communicating a clear message about what we want to change instead. And I think that there are some more constructive ways to do that, which I hope to talk about as we move forward here. But that's the first principle, right? Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Tomorrow, I'm going to go over principle number 2 and talk a little bit more about the difference that viewpoint brings to the world rather than the one that we often see right now. One last thing that I will say is that this live series, right, that I do every single day is really focused on helping people create change in the world. I go live at 9 a.m. on weekdays on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and rarely, but making an exception today, I go live on Instagram right now as well. So I want to bring this series to you on Instagram. But if you're on Instagram and you're watching this and you'd like to follow along, please do follow me on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And I will see you tomorrow. All right, I'll talk to you then.